Have you heard of Actual Justice Warrior? And did you see the video response that to you that he shared on Twitter? No. I haven't heard about any of this. I don't know who Actual Justice Warrior is. Did I get called out? Did I get owned? Did my ass get destroyed with facts and logic? That'd be fun. I don't know who this is. It seems like, okay, it's like a cartoon rabbit internet reactionary. Fun. Cool. Cool. Interesting. So this is like an internet fascist, okay. Or whatever, like an anti-SJW reactionary weirdo. That's fine. It's fun. Debunking step back on policing part 1. So I got sent this video on policing. It's actually pretty good. You trace back police departments even further than I previously, completely destroying the last slave patrols argument. Okay, so it's not mine. It's some... I don't really want to... It's a 20-minute long video. I'm not going to watch this shit. Oh, man. Part 1. So, yeah. The note on the Twitter thing, by the way, the note on that is I typically don't watch response videos to my content. I don't want to. I have no desire to. And all it's going to do is make me either frustrated or upset. So I don't usually.
I would like to thank Sean Fitzgerald, aka Actual Justice Warrior, for sharing part 1 of my video response to Step Back. Within 2 weeks, I went from having 35 subs to 2.5, which is still very small, but it's a great start. Also, my video reached 1k views in just 1 day, which is absolutely amazing. Anyway, I recommend you watch part 1 before viewing this video, since I will be continuing on when I left off because, oh boy, there's a lot of leftist BS I have to go over. Now, where did I left off? Oh, now I remember. Tristan asserts the common BLM narrative that Richard Nixon initiated the war on drugs to purge black people and hippies, citing the Harvard Magazine interview with John Ehrlichman.
Nixon, the father of the war on drugs, might not have known any of that. Maybe he was just misinformed. Too bad that there's nobody out there associated with the White House who spilled the beans on the administration designing the war on drugs as a war on civil disobedience and the left and black people. Okay, let's just talk about John Ehrlichman then. Ehrlichman was a domestic affairs advisor to Nixon and even did jail time for being involved in Watergate. So he was pretty close to old Tricky Dick in his trickiest moments. In 1994, he gave an interview to Harper's Magazine where he admitted to the whole thing.
The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Oof. That's not a good look for a guy with as stellar a reputation as Nixon.
I always find it quite odd that Nixon has been constantly presented by progressives as the embodiment of all things bigotry associated with the Republican Party, ignoring that Nixon was one of America's most progressive presidents and was a champion for civil rights. Obviously, Nixon had some issues, most notably his anti-Semitism and his political paranoia that eventually led him to spying on John Lennon and, of course, Watergate. However, the quote from Harper's Magazine is the only evidence that suggests Nixon orchestrated the war on drugs to unjustly target minorities. And I put evidence in quotation marks since there are suspicions among historians and even Ehrlichman's relatives that the quote was fabricated. Hear me out before accusing me of being a conspiracy theorist. The Harper Magazine interview, written by Dan Baum, was published in 2016, 17 years after the death of John Ehrlichman. Though Baum claimed that the interview with Ehrlichman occurred in 1994, according to Baum, he interviewed Ehrlichman for his 1996 book, Smoke and Mirrors, but left out the quote regarding the war on drugs as he felt it didn't fit the narrative that he wanted. I find it suspicious that Baum held this information for 22 years and only released it after Ehrlichman was long dead. Ehrlichman's own daughters came out to question the veracity of the quote. Even if the quote was legitimate, there are suspicions that Ehrlichman made the accusation up, as German Lopez states, but Ehrlichman's claim is likely an oversimplification. According to historians who have studied the period, and Nixon's drug policies in particular, there's no doubt Nixon was racist, and historians told me that race could have played one role in Nixon's drug war. But there's also signs that Nixon wasn't solely motivated by politics or race. For one, he personally despised drugs, to the point that it's not surprising he would want to rid the world of them. And there's evidence that Ehrlichman felt bitter and betrayed by Nixon after spending time in prison over the Watergate scandal, so he may have lied. More importantly, Nixon's drug policies did not focus on the kind of criminalization that Ehrlichman described. Instead, Nixon's drug war was largely a public health crusade, one that we reshaped into the modern punitive drug war we know today by later administrations, particularly President Ronald Reagan. Interesting that a journalist from Vox can disagree with the narrative spewed by Step Back. Tristan goes on to mention the Military Cooperation with Civilian Law Enforcement Agency Act of 1981, in which he implies that it acted in cracking down on the domestic drug trade.
In 1981, Reagan, the Gipper himself, in the name of continuing the war on drugs, passed the Military Cooperation with Civilian Law Enforcement Agencies Act, which is as terrifying as it sounds. It allowed the military to cooperate with the police, particularly in counter-drug operations and, quote, civil disturbances. Furthermore, they trained for normal and everyday occurrences the police handle all the time, like bomb disposal and counter-terrorism.
In actuality, the main purpose of the act was to combat drug smuggling on the US-Mexican border and counter narco-terrorism. Yes, those narcos, a drug trafficking organization that had orchestrated numerous terrorist attacks across the Americas, along with ties with terrorist organizations such as the FARC rebels in Colombia and Hezbollah. Tristan brings up the 1033 program, which allows military equipment to be transferred to local police departments, elaborating that Obama placed restrictions on the program before being reversed by Evil Orange Man in 2017.
Furthermore, Reagan's successor, George Bush, escalated the militarization of the police with the 1033 program. It allowed the over-bloated military budget to continue bloating like some sort of tick directed by David Cronenberg. 1033 allowed for the military to transfer excess equipment to civilian police agencies. The bill had bipartisan support and even expanded under the Democratic Clinton regime. President Barack Obama put some limits on what kinds of assets the military could transfer, but President Donald Trump rescinded that reform. And Joe Biden has yet to reverse that reversal.
Step Back never addresses the consequences of Obama's restrictions, as it deprived police departments of needed equipment. For instance, it banned modified police tanks, which I promised to address in part 1. Like I previously pointed out, these tanks are only really used in rescue situations in which law enforcement have to cross rugged terrain that is impossible to bypass with regular vehicles. The banning of tracked vehicles led to situations such as what happened in Volusia County, Florida, when a police officer was shot dead after trying to arrest an armed suspect who had fled into the woods. Besides tanks, other military-style equipment such as explosives and armored vehicles are essential for saving the lives not just of police officers, but civilians as well. A great example is the response from the Orlando police to the Pulse night shooting, in which they used explosives and a Bearcat vehicle to break holes into the building so that they could rescue those trapped inside the club. If it weren't for police access to bombs and armored vehicles, more people might have died from the Pulse night shooting. Tristan tries to insinuate that there's a sinister consequence in militarizing the police by citing the Waco and Ruby Ridge tragedies.
The consequences of this influx of weapons, military training, and legal protections from brutal violence are numerous. In some of the most infamous standoffs, the very name of the town they happened in is synonymous with militarized police. Think of towns like Waco or Ruby Ridge.
Tristan obviously forgot that the siege of the Branch Davidians were orchestrated by the BATF, not the police. In fact, those in the militia movement argue that the situation in Waco could have been better dealt with if they simply sent in local law enforcement to arrest David Koresh. Tristan goes on to mention the Ferguson riots, in which he once again uses deceptive images to inaccurately portray the cops as a way to downplay violence committed by quote-unquote peaceful protesters.
We can't talk about the militarization of the police without talking about the brutality on display during the first and second waves of Black Lives Matter protests. The police came out with snipers and armored personnel carriers to react to protesters in Ferguson who were angry over the gross misjustice in the police murder of Michael Brown in 2014.
Yet another argument that has been refuted to death from the likes of actual Justice Warrior. The narrative that Mr. Gentle Giant Michael Brown, who didn't do nothing, was shot by Officer Darren Wilson is nothing more than a woke fairy tale concocted by Ben Crump and Yale journalists. But first, I must address the elephant in the room, that being the image of a Hummer that Tristan knowingly used as a visual representation of an armored personnel carrier. It could be that Tristan isn't that knowledgeable on cars, but at least he should have known that Hummers are civilian vehicles that can be obtained by anybody. Yes, there are military variants, but the civilian models are basically almost the exact same as those used in the Iraq War. On the issue of Michael Brown, I have to summarize the repeated rebuttals on the hands up don't shoot narrative, but I feel that it's more effective to have cynical historian, a history tuber who has been an associate and collaborator of Tristan to do that for me, since even the likes of Cypher admits that the Mike Brown story is fake news.
And finally, we get to Ferguson, which was the result of sensational reporting of a police-related shooting. It's recent enough I don't need to go into too much detail, but the favorite catchphrase, hands up, don't shoot, is adopted from bad reporting on the incident. Though it has contradictory witness testimony and physical evidence that supports the cops' story, no evidence supports the frequently reported story of the victim saying, don't shoot.
For me to go further into the Mike Brown case would be a subject for another video, but if you're still interested, I suggest reading the Department of Justice report on the shooting that I will link in the description. The report compares and contrasts witness testimony to support the conclusion that the forensic evidence aligns with Officer Wilson's account. Instead, I want to pivot the discussion on the chaos that occurred in Ferguson.
The building is basically collapsed. You can hear the explosions going on inside there from whatever is inside, whether it's... Sorry, I just got hit by a rock. I've been hit with much worse in my day.
Now, I did briefly mention the violence and destruction caused by BLM in part 1, however, I didn't mention the overall scope of the riots. Minutes after Darren Wilson shot Brown in self-defense, cops who had entered the scene to investigate were welcomed by hostile residents shouting death threats at the officers and trespassing on the crime scenes. Backup had to be called due to the mob being antagonistic and halting the investigation. Detectives literally had to stop processing the scene due to shootings that were taking place in the area, as well as some individuals in the crowd encroaching on the crime scene and chanting, "Kill the police." At each of those times, having exhausted their existing resources, SLCPD personnel called emergency codes for additional patrol officers from throughout St. Louis County. Witness and detectives described the scene as volatile, causing concerns for both their personnel's safety and the integrity of the crime scene. Detectives were basically trapped within the chaos and ended up stuck in the scene for 5 hours until backup was able to secure the area. Keep in mind that this occurred minutes after Mike Brown's shooting, and there were plenty of riots and shootings similar to this that occurred throughout late 2014 and early 2015. Moving on, Tristan elaborates on a standoff that occurred at Philadelphia in 1985, in which local law enforcement sieged the residence of a radical black separatist group.
Influx of military training and equipment has consequences. Let's just talk about one example, like the time the police bombed a black neighborhood in Philadelphia. In 1985, an anarcho-primitivist black separatist group called MOVE lived in a row house in West Philadelphia. Because of the neighbors' complaints about noise and trash, the police took out arrest warrants on the MOVE members living in the house. Because they might have guns, heaven forbid in America, the mayor and police commissioner declared MOVE a terrorist organization. The police evacuated the neighbors and went in with 500 officers. When the residents of the MOVE house didn't respond to this threat, the officers then tried to break in to remove them. For the record, this is a response to about 13 people living in the house. 5 of which were children. The police threw tear gas into the building, which is a banned weapon under the Geneva Convention, by the way, and that escalation tactic provoked an armed standoff in which the police dumped over 10,000 rounds of ammunition into the house. No matter how many times the police gassed or shot them, the members of MOVE just didn't seem to want to leave. The police needed a new way to get in, and so they did the only sensible thing to try and convince them to leave when children are in danger. They dropped a bomb from a helicopter onto the roof of a house. It caused a massive fire that killed 11 of those 13 people, including all of the children. But wait, there's more! The fire then spread to 65 more houses and burned them to the ground. During this inferno, the police stopped firefighters from trying to put out the blaze.
I will admit that what had occurred was a great tragedy, and I will also admit that the resulting damage from the bombing was a horrible mistake by the Philadelphia police. However, Tristan, being disingenuous as always, left a lot of important context regarding MOVE and the circumstances building up to the raid. For starters, the police commissioner didn't outright declare MOVE a terrorist organization over the suspicion of having guns. In reality, the organization, known as MOVE, had before the raid made vulgar terrorist threats, going as far as planting fake bombs in random hotels throughout the US and the city of London, placed with letters threatening that they will strike for real if the Philadelphia police did not leave them alone. The PPD was surveilling MOVE over allegations of child abuse after neighbors reported seeing children belonging to the group members roaming the front yard naked in unsanitary conditions and appearing malnourished.
The kids were like little animals. They just threw something on them as far as clothes, because I've given them clothes. As far as food, at one time they were eating under the garbage cans. So what the neighbors did, they took their garbage cans in, they bought new garbage cans, and they put bread in them. So the kids would go in the garbage cans, they would have bread. You know, they could eat bread. And then we got found out, and the parents were furious, you know.
In 1978, MOVE made an agreement with the local city government to relocate from Philly within 90 days. However, the group broke their promise by continuing to stay past the 90-day limit, prompting the police to intervene. This led to an armed shootout between MOVE and the PPD, which led to one of the officers being killed in action. 9 MOVE members were given life sentences for the death of Officer James Ramp, while those remaining in the group were forced out of the neighborhood. MOVE took residence at a townhouse in western Philly, where they seek their revenge by harassing their neighbors with loudspeakers, uttering death threats, and sirens as an attempt to pressure the city's government to release the 9 imprisoned members.
You could not imagine. It's one thing to be 2 blocks away and hear it, but to live right next door, full blast in our bedroom.
And they would threaten to kill people. And they would name people by name, and my family was named as part of those people that they threatened to kill.
Wilson Good, who at the time had just recently been elected mayor, initially took a non-confrontational approach in dealing with MOVE, though it would later be proven ineffective as they would modify their house into a fortress, with railroad tracks, logs, and steel plates. They also threatened to kill the mayor and any police officer who may attempt to approach the MOVE compound. Being the last straw, arrest warrants were made, though granted for misdemeanor charges due to the city's confidence in continuing negotiation. When the cops approached the fortified clubhouse to fulfill their arrest warrant, MOVE instigated a shootout which led to the PPD to use explosives to blow holes in the walls. Although the front of the house was damaged, it was so fortified that it made it impossible for the police to seize the building. Mayor Good had enough, and he was done playing nice, demanding that the MOVE house to be taken by any means necessary. This is when the police took the initiative to force MOVE out of the building by dropping an explosive device near a man-made rooftop bunker. Putting their plan into action, they dropped the bomb from a helicopter. However, the explosion failed to demolish the bunker, but it did ignite a fire that would later destroy the MOVE house, killing 11 out of the 13 MOVE members and engulfing 61 homes. Tristan and I can agree that the actions taken by the PPD were wrong. What I do disagree with, on the other hand, is the role of military weapons in causing the tragedy. Poor planning should have been blamed, since although explosive devices might have caused the fire, there was plenty of time for the fire department to extinguish the flames before it could cause the massive damage that it did. Had the police ordered the fire to be stopped, instead of deliberately allowing it to burn the entire block, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. Going back a bit, Tristan claims that the use of tear gas in the the attempted siege of the MOVE house would have been a violation of the Geneva Convention. I will admit right now that I have a bias against the Geneva Convention since, in my opinion, they are a retarded and pointless organization that makes contradictory decisions and only really enforce their own rules if it suits their interests. However, to claim that tear gas is banned by Geneva is false. Although it is banned in cases of war, the convention does not prohibit the use of tear gas for domestic use, such as riot control. Tristan goes on about his own solution for the systemic problem of policing, that being the full abolition of the police, which sounds even worse than the concept of defunding them.
There's actually a braver option. Police abolitionists advocate that we don't actually need the police. It's not as far-fetched as you think, and police abolitionists have been working on it for some time. Instead of beating civilians into submission, let's work on fixing the social problems that cause crime to begin with. Perhaps we could look at crime as more of a way to see policy failure at play and work on making amends, reforming perpetrators, and restoring the broken social contract rather than shoving people into overcrowded dungeons. It's an idea called restorative justice.
That would be implying that all criminals are basically Aladdins, that criminals commit crimes and make bad decisions because social inequality and society made them that way, and if we redistribute the wealth and provide care, we can turn thieves, serial killers, and rapists into model citizens. This is far from reality. There are people who are sociopaths. Some individuals have sinister sexual urges. Some people are pedophiles. Granted, the United States have some variants of restorative justice. However, the type of reformative justice that Tristan is advocating is not justice at all. That being a system that compromises prison sentences for reconciliation with the victims, compensation with fines, and community service. I do see some potential of this resolving misdemeanors or less severe crime, but to implement such for cases such as murder, rape, or terrorism is not justice. Norway has this system, or at least something very similar to it, and I'm pretty sure that most of my viewers, and that includes you, Tristan, is aware of Anders Breivik and his acts of terrorism that he committed in 2011, in which he detonated a van bomb in Oslo, killing 8, and afterwards orchestrating a mass shooting at a youth camp that cost the lives of 69 kids. This system that Tristan loved so much rewarded this pathetic child-killing monster a 20-year sentence at a detention center that resembles more like a luxury dorm room than a prison cell, with accommodations such as a PlayStation and a television set. What kind of message does this give to white supremacists? That they could earn 20 years of free rent and unlimited video games if they go out and bomb the Capitol building and kill children en masse? Sorry, but I don't see this as justice, and so do people with common sense. Monsters like Anders Breivik, Dylan Roof, Ted Bundy, or any other criminal boogeyman shouldn't deserve a slap on the wrist. These individuals need to be confined from society for the safety of the innocent. Eventually, Tristan clarifies that he is in favor of community self-policing, which we all know what he actually means. Anarchists only oppose the police in name only, and comms are against policing when it enforces property rights and the rule of law, but they have no issues when it is used to reinforce their ideology, whether that be purging capitalists, anti-communists, or anyone they deem fascist. This has been documented in history. For instance, Ukrainian anarchists led by Nestor Makhno had their own secret police known as the Kontravodka. They were infamous for committing Jewish massacres and chain-ganging peasants who had opposed the Makhno regime. In anarchist Catalonia, anti-coms formulated their own militia for the purpose to kill Catholics, nationalists, and industrialists, putting into fruition what historians refer to as the Spanish Red Terror. Even in the modern day, anarchist policing exists in the form of Antifa, an organization that everyone is so familiar with to the point that I don't need to describe what they are. In conclusion, Tristan, aka Stepback, is probably the dumbest history tuber of all of YouTube. Every claim, fact, argument, and word is unfactual to the point that it doesn't take that much effort to fact check. But hey, I'm apparently wrong because Tristan has multiple master's degrees in American cultural studies. Anyway, please like and share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Oh, and I almost forgot. Remember that all commies are bad.